The clatter of silverware stopped abruptly when Jonathan's father slammed his fist on the table and bellowed, "You're not normal, son." Right there in front of his entire extended family gathered for Thanksgiving in their suburban Chicago home. What followed was not the expected rejection that would break him forever, but a path that led Jonathan straight into the arms of the one person who would help him rewrite his entire story. Jonathan's heart pounded like a drum in his chest as the words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. His mother gasped, his aunt covered her mouth, and his cousins exchanged wide-eyed glances. The turkey on the table suddenly seemed irrelevant. He had planned to tell them gently, perhaps after dessert, but his father's discovery of the text messages on his phone had forced everything out into the open. "How could you do this to us?" His father continued, voice trembling with a mix of anger and disappointment that cut deeper than any blade. Jonathan stood up slowly, his legs feeling like lead. At 28, he was an architect with a promising career in downtown Chicago, designing sleek office buildings that defined the skyline. But in this moment he felt like the scared teenager he once was, hiding who he was to keep the peace in their tight-knit community. "I can't change who I am, Dad," Jonathan said quietly, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. The room erupted in murmurs, some relatives whispering about shame on the family name, others simply staring in disbelief. His younger sister reached out a hand but pulled it back, torn between loyalty and confusion. Jonathan grabbed his coat from the hook by the door, the familiar scent of his mother's potpourri suddenly suffocating. He stepped out into the crisp November night, the door clicking shut behind him like a final punctuation mark on years of pretending. The suburban streets, lined with glowing Thanksgiving lights and American flags fluttering proudly, now felt foreign, as if the very ground he had grown up on had shifted beneath his feet. He drove aimlessly for an hour, tears blurring the taillights ahead, before pulling over on a quiet side street near the highway. His phone buzzed in his pocket, messages from family flooding in, some angry, some pleading for him to come back and talk it through. But Jonathan knew talk wouldn't fix this. He dialed the only number that felt like safety. "Jeremiah, it's me," he said when the warm voice answered on the second ring, laced with immediate concern. "They know everything. I had to leave." Jeremiah's response was calm and immediate. "Come here. My place in the city. You don't have to face this alone." By the time Jonathan pulled up to Jeremiah's apartment building in the Loop, the clock had ticked past midnight. Jeremiah met him at the door, his tall frame silhouetted by the soft light from inside, dark hair slightly tousled as if he had been pacing. Without a word, he pulled Jonathan into a tight embrace, the kind that said everything words couldn't. "You're safe now," Jeremiah whispered, his hand rubbing soothing circles on Jonathan's back. They sat on the couch in the modest living room, surrounded by Jeremiah's marketing firm awards and half-empty coffee mugs from late nights. Jonathan recounted the dinner, every accusation replaying in his mind like a broken record. Jeremiah listened without interrupting, his brown eyes steady and understanding. He had come out years earlier to his own family in California, and though their reaction had been milder, he knew the ache of being seen as different. That night, as Jonathan lay awake on the pull-out bed, staring at the city lights filtering through the blinds, he felt the weight of the label pressing down. Not normal. The words echoed, stirring up years of hidden doubts from high school locker room taunts to college dates he had ended early to avoid questions. Yet in the quiet, a small spark of defiance flickered. He wasn't broken. He was just himself. By morning, Jeremiah had already made coffee and toast, setting a plate beside Jonathan with a gentle smile. "One day at a time," he said. "We'll figure this out together." Jonathan nodded, grateful for the anchor in the storm, unaware that the road ahead would test every ounce of that newfound resolve. The family texts kept coming, but he silenced his phone, focusing instead on the man beside him who made the chaos feel survivable. The next few weeks blurred into a rhythm of adjustment that Jonathan never imagined he would need. He crashed at Jeremiah's apartment full-time, turning the spare room into a makeshift office where he sketched building designs late into the night to distract from the silence of his family's group chat, which had gone eerily quiet after the initial barrage. Work at the architecture firm offered some normalcy, but even there the air felt thicker, as if word had somehow traveled through the professional grapevine. Colleagues who once clapped him on the back now offered awkward nods or avoided eye contact during team meetings. Jonathan threw himself into a new project, redesigning a community center for an underserved neighborhood on the south side. Pouring his energy into blueprints that represented stability he no longer felt at home. Jeremiah, with his steady job in digital marketing and easy laugh, became the steady heartbeat of their days. Mornings started with shared breakfasts at the small kitchen table overlooking Lake Michigan, where they talked about everything except the elephant in the room. "You don't have to prove anything to them," Jeremiah would say over scrambled eggs, his hand brushing Jonathan's in quiet reassurance. But Jonathan wasn't so sure. The internal voice, the one shaped by his father's lectures on tradition and legacy, whispered that love like theirs came with a price. Still, Jeremiah's presence chipped away at the doubt. One evening after a long day, they walked along the riverwalk, the city lights reflecting on the water like scattered stars. Jeremiah stopped under a bridge, turning to face him. "Whatever happens with your family, I've got your back. This is real, Jonathan. Us." The words landed softly, wrapping around Jonathan like a warm coat against the winter chill settling over Chicago. Yet cracks began to show in the foundation. A call from his sister late one night brought news that their father had suffered a mild heart scare. Nothing serious but enough to rattle everyone. "He won't say it, but he misses you," she whispered. Jonathan hung up feeling torn, the guilt twisting like a knife. He confided in Jeremiah over late-night tea, pacing the living room floor. "Maybe I should go back, explain again." Jeremiah listened, but his jaw tightened slightly, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face. "Only if you're ready. But don't let them make you feel small again." Jonathan nodded, but the conversation left a subtle tension hanging between them, the first hint that even their bond wasn't immune to the outside pressure. At work the following Monday, things escalated. During a client presentation, one of the senior partners pulled Jonathan aside afterward. "Great work on the renderings, but keep personal matters quiet around the team. Clients prefer stability, you know?" The implication stung like a slap, reinforcing the label from Thanksgiving. Jonathan drove home that evening with his hands gripping the wheel tighter than usual, replaying the words. He arrived to find Jeremiah cooking pasta, the aroma filling the apartment like a promise of normalcy. They ate in comfortable silence at first, then Jonathan shared the incident. Jeremiah set down his fork, eyes softening. "You're more than their judgments. Your talent speaks for itself." That night they sat on the couch watching an old movie, shoulders touching, the simple closeness easing the day's weight. Jonathan realized then how deeply he had come to rely on Jeremiah, not just as a partner but as the mirror reflecting back a version of himself worth fighting for. The weeks turned into a month, and Jonathan started volunteering at a local LGBTQ youth center on weekends, helping teens with college applications and listening to their stories. It felt like a small step toward reclaiming his narrative. Jeremiah joined him once, sharing his own coming-out journey, and seeing the impact on the kids strengthened their connection. But back at the family front, an email from his mother arrived, polite but distant, asking if he would consider attending a cousin's wedding alone. For appearances, it read. Jonathan deleted it, the hurt blooming fresh, yet he felt a quiet strength growing. Jeremiah noticed the change, pulling him close one evening as snow began to fall outside their window. "You're building something real here. Don't let the past steal that." The words lingered, planting seeds of hope amid the lingering uncertainty of what family reconciliation might look like, if it ever came at all. Spring arrived in Chicago with a burst of color along the lakefront. But for Jonathan, the season brought fresh challenges that tested the fragile peace he had built. His work on the community center project hit a snag when a key client requested last-minute changes that required pulling all-nighters, leaving him exhausted and short-tempered. Jeremiah, juggling a major campaign launch at his firm, tried to lighten the load with surprise dinners and encouraging notes left on the fridge, but the strain showed in small ways. One afternoon, Jonathan returned home to find Jeremiah on a call with an old college friend, laughing in a way that stirred an unexpected pang of jealousy. "Just catching up," Jeremiah explained later, but the brief hesitation in his voice planted a seed of doubt. Was there more to the history Jonathan didn't know? That doubt grew when an anonymous tip at work led to office gossip about Jonathan's personal life circulating in the break room. He overheard snippets one day while grabbing coffee. "Heard he's one of those. You know." The words echoed his father's outburst, making the sleek conference rooms feel suddenly hostile. Jonathan confronted his supervisor privately, who offered a half-hearted apology but suggested he focus on deliverables. The encounter left him reeling, questioning if his talent alone would ever be enough. That evening he skipped dinner, retreating to the spare room to sketch furiously, the lines on the paper blurring with frustration. Jeremiah knocked softly, entering with 2 mugs of tea. "Talk to me," he said, sitting on the edge of the desk. Jonathan poured out the day's events, the words tumbling like a dam breaking. Jeremiah listened, then shared a story from his own early career struggles, how he had faced similar whispers but pushed through by proving his ideas were stronger than any label. Their conversation stretched late, evolving into a deeper discussion about boundaries and support. "I don't want you fighting my battles," Jonathan admitted, "but I need you to believe I can handle them." Jeremiah nodded, pulling him into a hug that lingered with quiet understanding. The next morning, Jonathan arrived at work with renewed determination, presenting revised designs that impressed even the skeptical client. Word spread positively for once, and a few colleagues offered genuine congratulations. It felt like a small victory, chipping away at the isolation. Meanwhile, family ties tugged harder. His sister visited unannounced one weekend, bringing photos from home and tentative questions about Jeremiah. "Dad's been quieter since the heart thing," she said over coffee at a downtown cafe. "Mom thinks maybe time will help." Jonathan appreciated the olive branch but held back details, protecting the life he was building. When he relayed the visit to Jeremiah that night, the conversation turned unexpectedly tense. "I get it, family matters," Jeremiah said, "but don't forget who stood by you when they didn't." The words carried an edge, hinting at unresolved feelings from Jeremiah's past relationships where partners had chosen family over him. Jonathan sensed the undercurrent but let it pass, choosing instead to focus on the positive shift at work. By late spring, the community center groundbreaking ceremony approached, and Jonathan's designs earned local media mention. He invited Jeremiah as his date, a quiet declaration that felt both terrifying and freeing. At the event, surrounded by city officials and residents, Jonathan stood tall as the ribbon was cut, the applause washing over him like validation he hadn't realized he craved. Jeremiah squeezed his hand discreetly afterward, pride shining in his eyes. "See, this is you proving it every day." The moment solidified something deep within Jonathan, a growing belief that his worth wasn't defined by bloodlines or office whispers. Yet as they drove home through blooming parks, the earlier tension with Jeremiah lingered unspoken, a cloud on an otherwise bright horizon that neither addressed directly, waiting for the right time or perhaps the next storm to force it into the open. Summer heat blanketed Chicago, turning the streets into shimmering mirages, when the first real crack appeared in Jonathan and Jeremiah's foundation. The community center project wrapped successfully, earning Jonathan a promotion and a feature in a local architecture magazine. Colleagues who had once distanced themselves now sought his input on bids, a shift that should have felt triumphant. Instead, it amplified the isolation at family gatherings he still avoided. His mother's occasional emails grew more insistent, mentioning his father's improving health and subtle hints about coming home for the holidays this year. Jonathan read them in the quiet of his office, the words stirring old loyalties he thought he had buried. The betrayal came unexpectedly through a mutual friend from Jeremiah's marketing circle. At a networking happy hour downtown, the friend pulled Jonathan aside after a few drinks. "Look, I like you both, but Jeremiah's ex reached out to me last week. Said they reconnected during that big campaign crunch. Nothing happened, but just watch your back." The revelation hit like cold water. Jonathan replayed recent late nights when Jeremiah had been distant, attributing them to work stress. That evening he confronted Jeremiah in their apartment, voice steady but heart racing. "Is there something you're not telling me about your past?" Jeremiah's face paled, then flushed with frustration. "It was one call for closure. I didn't want to burden you with my old stuff while you were dealing with your family." The argument escalated, words flying about trust and timing, each accusation rooted in deeper fears. Jonathan felt the ground shift again, the label "not normal" morphing into doubts about his own judgment in love. He spent the night on the couch, staring at the ceiling as rain pattered against the windows. By morning, Jeremiah had left for the office early, leaving a note. "We need to talk when things cool down." Jonathan threw himself into a new bid at work, designing a sustainable housing complex, but the creative flow stalled amid the emotional fog. A close colleague noticed and invited him for lunch, offering unexpected support. "I've been there, man. Family, relationships, it all piles up. But you've got real talent here." The conversation reminded Jonathan of the youth center kids who looked up to him, prompting a visit after work where he mentored a teenager facing similar identity struggles. Sharing his story without details helped, reinforcing that his experiences could light paths for others. Jeremiah returned that evening with takeout and an apology in his eyes. They talked for hours on the balcony overlooking the glowing city, unpacking Jeremiah's fear of repeating past patterns where partners had chosen secrecy over openness. "I was scared you'd see me as the guy who couldn't fully commit because of my history," he admitted. Jonathan shared his own vulnerability, how the family rejection made him question everything. The conversation ended in a long embrace, the kind that mended cracks without erasing them. Yet the incident left scars, teaching Jonathan that love required ongoing choice amid misunderstandings. As weeks passed, he channeled the energy into advocating for inclusive policies at his firm, proposing diversity training that surprisingly gained traction. The move brought subtle respect from leadership and allies within the team. Family-wise, a surprise call from his father arrived one humid afternoon. "Son, your sister's wedding is coming up. No pressure, but we'd like to see you." The olive branch felt tentative, laced with unresolved tension, but Jonathan agreed to attend alone, needing space to test the waters. Jeremiah supported the decision quietly, though worry etched his features. "Just remember your worth isn't up for negotiation." The words echoed as Jonathan boarded the train to the suburbs, heart heavy with anticipation of what reconciliation, or further heartbreak, awaited. The cousins' wedding unfolded under a clear summer sky in the family backyard, string lights twinkling like hesitant stars. Jonathan arrived early, helping set up chairs while relatives offered stiff smiles and avoided the elephant in the room. His father approached during a quiet moment by the grill, older now with the heart scares shadow in his eyes. "Glad you came," he muttered, not quite meeting Jonathan's gaze. The ceremony passed in a blur of vows and laughter, but at the reception, when toasts turned personal, Jonathan felt the stares. He slipped away to the garden, breathing deeply under the oak tree where he had played as a boy. His mother found him there, tears in her eyes. "We miss you. All of us." The words cracked something inside, but Jonathan held firm. "I miss you too, Mom. But I can't pretend anymore." Returning to the city that night, he found Jeremiah waiting with open arms and no questions, sensing the emotional toll. The following weeks brought a pivotal decision. A rival firm offered Jonathan a senior role on a high-profile project, but it required relocating to New York for 6 months. The opportunity promised career-defining success, Yet it meant time away from Jeremiah and the fragile family bridges he had begun crossing. After days of internal debate, Jonathan chose to turn it down, prioritizing the life he had built in Chicago. "This is where my story is," he told Jeremiah one evening on their rooftop, city breeze cooling the tension. The sacrifice felt right, a deliberate stand for balance over ambition. Jeremiah's pride was palpable, strengthening their bond through shared vulnerability. Work pressure mounted instead with a tight deadline on the housing complex, where Jonathan's innovative designs faced unexpected pushback from conservative stakeholders concerned about community fit. The coded language stung, echoing old wounds, but he defended his vision in meetings with data and passion, refusing to dilute his ideas. Late nights blurred into exhaustion, and one particularly rough week, Jeremiah stepped in by handling household tasks and reminding him to eat. Their relationship deepened in those quiet acts of care, conversations shifting from surface to soul-level reflections on what family truly meant. A turning point came when Jonathan's father called again, this time about the family hardware store struggling financially after supply chain issues. "I don't know who else to ask," he admitted gruffly. Jonathan offered to review the books remotely, then surprised everyone by redesigning the storefront virtually for free. The gesture opened a door neither had expected, leading to tentative video calls where practical talk replaced accusations. Jeremiah supported from the sidelines, occasionally joining calls to offer marketing insights, his presence a quiet bridge. The sacrifice of time and emotional energy paid off slowly, as the store's new online presence began turning profits. Jonathan felt the weight lifting, realizing that proving worth wasn't about grand gestures but consistent, honest actions rooted in who he was. By fall, with leaves turning gold along Lakeshore Drive, Jonathan stood taller in every space he entered. The housing project launched successfully despite earlier doubts, earning industry awards that silenced workplace skeptics. Family dinners became monthly occurrences, awkward at first but warming with each shared meal. Jeremiah remained his constant, their evenings filled with laughter and plans for the future. The journey had forged resilience in both men, transforming crisis into quiet strength. Yet Jonathan knew the path forward would still hold challenges, each one an opportunity to choose authenticity over approval. Winter returned to Chicago with gentle snowfalls that blanketed the city in fresh possibility. The hardware store renovation Jonathan had spearheaded became a local success story, drawing community praise and mending family rifts in ways conversations never could. His father, during a quiet holiday visit to the apartment, finally met Jeremiah properly over coffee. "You make my son happy," he said simply, the words carrying years of unspoken weight. It wasn't full acceptance yet, but it was a start, enough for Jonathan to breathe easier. At work, his promotion came with a corner office overlooking the river, a tangible symbol of talent recognized beyond labels. Colleagues celebrated genuinely, the earlier gossip fading into distant memory. Jonathan and Jeremiah marked the season with a simple tree in their living room, exchanging small gifts that spoke of shared growth. One evening by the fire, Jeremiah turned to him, eyes reflecting the lights. "We've come through the fire, haven't we?" Jonathan smiled, pulling him close in an embrace that held all the unspoken promises of tomorrow. The city hummed below, indifferent yet somehow approving of their quiet victory. Family gatherings now included Jeremiah occasionally, conversations flowing with cautious warmth. Jonathan volunteered more at the youth center, mentoring with stories of his own path, watching young lives brighten with hope. The internal crisis that began at that Thanksgiving table had evolved into a profound awakening. Worth wasn't granted by others but claimed through living truthfully. As the new year approached, Jonathan reflected on the journey while walking hand in hand with Jeremiah along a snow-dusted path in Lincoln Park. The man beside him had been the unexpected light in the darkest hours, their love a steady force that outshone every doubt. The family hardware store thrived, his career soared, and the label "not normal" had lost its power entirely. In its place stood a man who knew his value, proven not by silencing voices but by rising above them with integrity and heart. True or false? One must prove their success before society fully accepts their true self?